Okay, so today we're diving into something kind of different, something that's been really swirling around in my mind. You know how sometimes we talk about spirituality as the soul living in God? It's like we're striving, reaching for that connection, right?
Right.
But then we stumbled upon this text and it throws us a curveball. It's talking about God living in the soul, and suddenly I'm feeling like we've entered a whole different dimension.
Yeah, and it's not just playing with words, this text. It's pointing to something much deeper, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Like, we're talking about a whole other level of spiritual experience here. And to make things even more interesting, this whole exploration comes from, get this, Book 2, Chapter 1, Section 1, the nature and excellence of the state of abandonment.
Abandonment. Now, there's a word that grabs your attention.
Right. I mean, just saying it makes me a little uneasy, but also kind of intrigued. It's like this deep dive is less about deciphering a code and more about stepping into a different way of being spiritual.
And that's where the real meat of it lies, I think. It's about how we approach our spiritual growth, the very core of it.
Okay, so how does this text differentiate between these two approaches, the soul living in God and God living in the soul? Because honestly, it kind of jumps right in.
Right into the deep end. And that's part of what makes it so fascinating. But maybe think of it like this soul living in God. It's like that initial excitement of learning something new, you know?
Yeah.
You're hitting the books, you're seeking out teachers, you're following each step carefully. There's this structure, a clear path, a curriculum almost.
Like you're a student in a classroom, diligently taking notes. You're consciously putting in the effort.
Exactly. And that effort is so important.
Yeah.
But then we have this other side, this God living in the soul. This is where things get really, really interesting. It's less about striving and more about surrendering.
Surrendering. Okay. You've officially piqued my curiosity.
Imagine, if you will, a child completely trusting their parent to lead the way. No questions asked, no need to know the destination.
Just pure, unquestioning trust.
Yes, and the path unfolds organically with each step. You're not forcing it, you're allowing it to emerge. The text even uses this beautiful image of a hidden balm, silently working its magic.
Hidden balm. Okay, now we're talking metaphors. I like it.
It's subtle but potent. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How can something seemingly passive still have such a profound impact?
Like those quiet heroes in history, right? The ones who weren't necessarily in the spotlight, but their actions had this ripple effect that shaped everything.
It really challenges our perception of what it means to make a difference, doesn't it?
Big time. So we're not just talking about grand gestures here. Sometimes it's about the energy we bring to each moment, the invisible forces at play.
Exactly. And to bring it back to the text, it actually compares this state of God living in the soul to Jesus.
Okay, whoa. Now that's a bold comparison.
Right. But it makes you think. The text suggests that just as Jesus emanated this healing energy effortlessly, so too can we tap into a similar power, a similar grace, by cultivating this state of God living in the soul. It's about embodiment, about becoming a vessel.
Wait, so are we saying that we can impact others without even realizing it, like spiritual osmosis or something?
Now, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The text doesn't give us all the answers, and I think that's part of the mystery. It's inviting us to consider the possibility of deeper forces at work, of an interconnectedness that we're only beginning to grasp.
So it's not about consciously trying to, like, emit good vibes or anything?
Not at all. It's about cultivating a certain inner state, a receptivity that allows that energy, that grace to flow through us naturally.
Okay, I have to admit I'm a little overwhelmed, but in a good way. We've gone from diligent students to trusting children to Jesus, and now we're talking about subtle energy fields and spiritual osmosis.
And this is just the beginning. What's fascinating is that the text doesn't necessarily say one approach is better than the other. It's not about choosing between active pursuit or complete surrender.
So it's more like recognizing there might be different phases, different aspects of our spiritual evolution.
Exactly. And navigating those different phases, knowing when to lean into one approach versus the other, that's where things get really interesting. And that's what we'll be exploring more deeply after the break. So we're left with this question, right? How do we navigate these different phases? When do we lean in? When do we let go? It's tricky.
It really is. And the text doesn't exactly give us a roadmap, does it?
No, it doesn't. But maybe instead of looking for a map, we can think of it as more of a dance. Sometimes we're leading, sometimes we're following.
I like that. A spiritual tango. But how do we know which move to make?
Well, remember that image of the child trusting their parent?
Yeah, that really resonated.
There's a certain wisdom in that kind of surrender, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. But children are also incredibly intuitive. They know when something feels safe, when something feels right.
Exactly. They haven't yet learned to distrust their gut. And that's something I think we can all learn from, to cultivate that childlike trust while also staying grounded in our own wisdom.
That makes sense. So it's not about being naive, but about finding that balance between seeking understanding, that soul in God approach,
Right.
and surrendering to something larger than ourselves.
Yes, and that's where discernment comes in.
Discernment. That's a word I hear thrown around a lot in spiritual circles. But what does it actually look like in practice? How do we know if we're actually tapping into divine guidance or if it's just, our own desires and wishful thinking?
It's the age-old question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. But the text does offer some clues. It talks about this state of God living in the soul as a hidden balm, something that works beneath the surface.
Okay, I remember that image.
And that makes me think about those times when we've felt most aligned, most in flow. It's not always a lightning bolt moment, is it?
Definitely not.
It's often more subtle. A sense of peace, a quiet knowing, an inner nudge in a certain direction.
So paying attention to those subtle cues, those whispers of intuition, could that be part of it?
I think so. And maybe it's also about creating space for those whispers to be heard. Because let's be honest, our minds can be pretty noisy places.
Oh, tell me about it. Mine's like a constant stream of to-do lists and worries.
And that's where those small, consistent practices come in. Because creating space doesn't have to mean going on a silent retreat. It can be as simple as taking a few deep breaths before you start your day, or maybe spending a few minutes in nature, just observing.
Those are great ideas. But what about when we're feeling really stuck, like we've lost that connection completely?
Well, maybe that's a sign to lean back into that soul and God approach. Remember, it's all about finding that balance. So if surrender feels elusive, maybe it's time to pick up a book, seek out a teacher, or re-engage with a practice that's been helpful in the past.
So we have permission to cycle back and forth, to experiment and see what works.
Absolutely. In fact, I think that's encouraged. Because spiritual growth isn't linear. It's a spiral. We revisit certain themes, certain lessons, but each time we do, we come at them from a slightly different perspective.
I like that. It's like we're constantly evolving, deepening our understanding with each turn of the spiral. But I have to admit, I'm still a little unclear on how to actually cultivate more of that God and the soul energy in daily life, because it's easy to get caught up in the doing, right? The striving, the achieving. How do we shift from that to a place of simply being?
That's a beautiful question, and I think it's one that we'll be unpacking even further after the break.
So how do we actually do that? Shift from all that striving and doing to just being? Because honestly, it sounds kind of impossible given, the demands of everyday life.
It can definitely feel that way, can't it? But the text reminds us that even small, consistent practices can make a big difference over time. It's about those subtle shifts, those moments throughout the day when we can reconnect with that deeper part of ourselves.
Like what? Give me some examples. Because I'll be honest, the image of meditating on a mountaintop doesn't quite fit into my schedule these days.
And you don't need a mountaintop. Mm-hmm. The beauty of it is that these practices can be woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. Like you said earlier, your commute. What if, instead of seeing it as just time spent getting from A to B, you use that time to cultivate a sense of presence?
Okay, I'm listening. How do I turn my morning commute into a spiritual practice?
It could be as simple as bringing your awareness to your breath, feeling the weight of your body in the seat, noticing the sights and sounds around you.
So it's about finding those little pockets of mindfulness throughout the day?
Exactly. And as you move through your day, see if you can approach each interaction, each task, with a sense of openness, a willingness to be surprised.
Like I'm actively looking for those glimpses of grace, those moments of connection that I might otherwise miss.
Yes, because those moments are always there, even in the midst of chaos and routine.
But how do we know if it's working? I mean, this all sounds great in theory, but is there a way to actually track our progress? Some kind of spiritual measuring stick?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
But the text doesn't really offer any concrete metrics, and maybe that's the point. It's not about achieving a specific outcome or earning a gold star. It's about the continual practice, the ongoing journey of surrender and receptivity.
So are you saying we just have to trust the process?
I think so. It's about cultivating that deep inner knowing that even when we can't see it, something profound is happening beneath the surface. Remember the analogy of the gardener.
Right. The gardener doesn't dig up the seeds every day to see if they're growing. They trust the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the invitation for us as well. To trust that as we water the seeds of surrender, of receptivity, of presence, they will bear fruit in their own time.
I love that analogy. And it makes me think about that powerful message from the text, this idea that by embracing nothingness, by letting go of our need to control, we're actually making space for something far greater to take root within us.
It's a beautiful paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
That in the act of surrendering, of emptying ourselves, we open ourselves to a fullness that we could never have imagined on our own.
Wow. This whole conversation has been such a powerful reminder to slow down, to listen to that quiet inner voice, and to trust that even in the midst of all the chaos and uncertainty, there's a deeper wisdom guiding us if we're only willing to surrender to it.
Beautifully said. It's been a true pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of spiritual surrender. We hope you'll take these insights and continue to explore them in your own lives. Until next time, may you find moments of grace, wonder, and joyful surrender in the everyday miracles of your own being.